I mean, yeah, but I'd rather have like
I used it for all my cover letters.
she only really needs to be one student. Like, I would try
It gets some of the context like wrong. Like I don't have any graphic design, but I'll go change it.
I think she
I
was
know.
learning to like
Sometimes I just winged it.
and it was like, oh, I guess he was. Because like that's like her story. Like I don't know.
I'll say that I didn't want to.
Yeah, I think clearly like she said she went to church and learned it and was very good. But yeah.
Cool. All right, let's get started. I don't know if you guys want to move over here so it's easier to see, but it's up to you. I just know you're a little close to the TV, if you will. Maybe your grandparents would be upset at you. Like, I know my grandma would be very upset with me if I was this close to a projector. But
they tell you to get away from the screen.
yeah. Okay, but if that works for you, works for me. Well, welcome to Dive, everybody. We have a lot of new faces today, which is really exciting. Madison and I have been at capacity mentally for the last few weeks, so we've had meetings technically, but we haven't really done much. So
Thomas was there to witness. We appreciate you, Thomas.
Yeah, we appreciate you, Thomas. But
show up to the meetings regardless.
This week is a bit of a return to form, so we have a pretty fun little presentation. And then feel free to kind of hop in and let's have a discussion whenever you kind of want to. So a few things to discuss. Madison, you want to take it?
Yeah, so great job everyone with BuildFest. If y'all want to move forward with anything that you're interested in building more, let us know. Keep us in the loop. Erin has such a resource for either connecting with proper like opportunities or resources on campus, and or that she can find someone to sponsor it. So definitely stay in touch if you still want to be building that out. Also, if you need play testers or if you need people to test it out, you can utilize these Dive members. So definitely something to take advantage of. And then we have In-Between going on. If you're not familiar with In-Between, it is the immersive capstone experience. So basically they're putting on a full-fledged like production experience, and they need some volunteers. Brendan's not here right now, but we have her contact information, and also you can just be like at Bren. I'm pretty sure that's like somewhere close to her Discord name, and then you can reach out to her. I think right now they need like help with painting and stuff. And then we also are going to be beginning officer applications next week. So if you're interested in being a officer for Dive, we do want to keep this club alive. We spent a lot of time getting it approved. It took a whole semester to get approved officially on HornsLink. If you're not also a part of the HornsLink, join our HornsLink. That would make me very, very happy. And the whole officer team is basically graduating. So if you're really interested in joining, it's definitely a way to get involved, get really close with TXI. And if you don't have the capacity to take the classes, you can get really involved with this and be just as like involved with TXI as you would be as a student.
Cool. So, if you haven't already joined, we have a separate Discord just for Dive. It just makes it easier for us to talk about things. So if you haven't joined it, I would recommend you doing that. You'll get a lot less notifications on this one than you will if you're a part of the TXI one. So join this, meet the TXI one, and then you can stay up to date with meetings happening for Dive.
I didn't know there was Velcro on this. So.
Oh no!
So that was fun. It's okay. It's not.
Well, it's a good thing you don't have curly hair, because that would have been a lot worse.
Yeah. No kidding. Oh yeah, introduce yourselves in the introductions channel. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So I get to know who y'all are.
Cool. So, moving forward, this is something that if you've been here, you know we do this, but every week we do immersive news in the week. So just kind of things that are happening in the headlines that are kind of related to what we do here at TXI. Given that this week we're going to be doing kind of the intersection of AI and the metaverse, if you will, I thought this was interesting. This literally happened like probably 6 or 7 hours ago. But basically, a bunch of really famous people signed an open letter to OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT and DALL-E and a bunch of other AI tools, and basically was like, we need to put a 6-month pause on AI development so that we can figure out what's going on here, figure out how we can move forward, we can regulate things. Basically, they were saying, we're moving too fast, we need to slow down. So, I mean, these are some of the notable people that have signed this letter. Elon Musk is the one that's getting all the headlines. But, I mean, Steve Wozniak, who co-founded Apple, and then there's a bunch of other kind of, Andrew Yang, who is a presidential candidate, a very progressive presidential candidate. One of the only ones that's not like over 65 years old. So that's good. What?
He's a really cool dude.
Yeah, he's a cool dude. And then him over here, he's the CEO of Stability AI, which is the company that makes Stable Diffusion, if you know that one. So that one's a little weird because I think he has a vested interest in OpenAI not developing things because he also runs an AI company that's trying to compete. So I just found this really interesting, and there's a lot of people that have kind of hopped onto this bandwagon, and I personally don't think it's going to do anything, but it's at least interesting to think about.
It's really interesting about the Pinterest one.
Oh, the Pinterest?
Yeah. I did read somewhere off topic, but like Pinterest is like one of the best tools to like figure out like predictions because people like start pinning like trends. So it's one of the best tools to figure out future trends. So I wonder.
That's true. Well,
Side comment on Pinterest.
yeah, so that's interesting. Well, and actually, so GPT-4 came out a few weeks ago. News came out recently that GPT-5 is currently being trained on Microsoft servers. So like it is. GPT-5 is basically in development right now.
Oh, I'm even like so down. Like I'm like GPT-4 just got released like in December. Like
Yeah. So that's wild.
Dang.
And then in a little bit, maybe not as doomsday-y, I've seen this headline a million times, and who knows if it'll actually happen. But Apple's big developer conference is happening in June, and all the rumors are basically suggesting that they're going to be putting out a VR headset or an mixed reality headset of some kind. No one really knows what this looks like. But I mean, again, I've seen headlines like this so many times, and it never really happens. But this could be the time that this actually does. And whenever Apple does release something in this ecosystem or in the immersive world, we're gonna see a pretty big shift in how the public kind of perceives immersive technology. So this could be really huge for us. And I think if you are interested. It's during the summer, but maybe we'll have a little watch party and cross our fingers and hope something interesting happens. So, with that being said, let's hop into today's topic, which is AI in the metaverse. We have all of these AI tools. I'm sure everyone is familiar with ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion or all of these crazy AI tools. And today's meeting is about kind of understanding how those tools are going to affect the immersive technology future that we kind of all expect to be coming. Something that's really important here is this idea that exists in futurism and the way people talk about kind of technological foresight. It's the idea of intersection. So when things get disrupted, the big things that happen in technology happen when two technologies are maturing at the same time, and then they come together. So if you think about like the iPhone, it's a very disruptive technology. The iPhone was disruptive partly because batteries got good enough where you could put a battery in a phone and it can last all day. But also because touchscreens got good enough, and also because software development got good enough. All of these things got good enough at the same time to create a product that no one could even fathom before. So what's important to note here is when we kind of look towards the next future, or the next kind of generation of consumer technology, you can't just be like, oh, headsets are going to get better, therefore headsets are the future. You have to be like, headsets are getting better, and AI is getting better, and computer vision is getting better, and all of these things are getting better to eventually kind of lead to some future that we kind of can't really predict super accurately. But hopefully today we'll kind of go through a little bit of the way that AI specifically is playing into that equation, and it'll give you a little bit of a sense of kind of what the future holds. So, just for the sake of this conversation, this is how I've defined the metaverse. We did a whole dive meeting a few weeks ago about what is the metaverse, and everyone has their own definition of it. So
behind the slides, there's kind of like a board.
We have everyone's personal definitions here on the board. We could do it again. We literally did a whole meeting about everyone's personal definitions about what this is, but this is kind of how I defined it for the sake of this conversation, just to make things easier. So it's a near future technology platform or platforms that rely on virtual or augmented reality as a means of interacting with each other in the internet. Basically, what the metaverse means in this context is VR or AR experiences that allow people to connect with each other and with the internet. So essentially what we're just talking about here is the VR future or the AR future. Again, we did an entire meeting about this, but for the sake of today, this is kind of where I'm coming from here. So I kind of broke things up today into these 3 topics, and then we'll kind of go through each one. And again, feel free to hop in at any point and ask questions or just kind of share your thoughts. So first is generative AI building the metaverse. So this is actually saying, how are we going to build the actual experiences that we take part in? Populating the metaverse, or virtual beings populating the metaverse, this is saying, okay, we have these spaces now. We have these virtual worlds, if you will. How do we actually bring virtual characters into those worlds, or use AI to kind of augment the way that we kind of interact with those? And then concerns about bias and privacy. This is kind of saying these are the downfalls of what this future could look like, and kind of the ways that AI might amplify some of those problems. So first, let's get into generative AI building the metaverse. So I'm sure you guys are somewhat familiar with like a Stable Diffusion or a DALL-E, right? These AI image generators. That's kind of the first step here, but there's a lot of other tools similar in nature to those that are going to kind of redefine everything that we think we know about game development, and as that kind of specifically applies to the metaverse. We'll look at that right now. So these are 3D model generators. So we've seen a lot of image generators, right? Person sitting in a chair, and then it's an image. This is basically the same idea, but it's 3D models instead. So these are 2 research projects, both done by NVIDIA. This is text to object 3D that basically could be like red car, and it just basically just spits it out, which is pretty incredible. And then this is what's called a NERF, or a neural emission radiant field or something. But basically what it does is it can take individual photos of something and turn it into a high-res 3D model. So what this is able to do is basically scan real-world items and bring them into a virtual environment really, really easily and with really high fidelity. So if any of you have done 3D modeling in the past, you know how much of a pain in the fucking ass it is. It's horrible. Yeah, it's absolutely horrible, and it takes so freaking long. So when we talk about kind of what are some of the biggest hurdles towards getting to the metaverse or the immersive technology future, a big part of it is just assets. It's literally just making enough stuff to put into these game worlds so that we can actually interact with things. Like that is such a huge hurdle to get through, and this is going to be kind of one of the easiest ways that this gets solved, right? And this is how it exists now. You can imagine how 5-10 years from now, how insane that this is going to be, and you can just say a city with these characteristics, and it'll populate every car and every person and every storefront that's in that world. So again, this is what exists now, but we have a long way to go, and you can kind of imagine what the future of this kind of thing looks like. So this is an interesting idea. This is an AI skybox. So if you've ever done game dev, I'm sure you've used a skybox before, but the idea is it's basically a 360 image that you kind of put around your scene, and it can help do reflections, and it can help basically create this world that maybe you can't actually walk to this place, but it's creating this 360 image that then you can build all of your game assets in. So this is an app that somebody, or Blockade Labs has made, where you basically can just type in an immersive technology workshop, and I set it to like interiors, and then you can basically just generate anything that you want. So if you actually kind of go here, does anyone have a prompt we can put in here? Either indoor or outdoor? Yeah, okay. Spaceship cockpit. And we can go interior. Oh. Oh, it's loading. We're almost there. There we go. Well,
It's a car in space.
yeah, it's a car in space, which I guess is close enough, right? Look it.
There's a car in the sky.
Yeah. Right, so clearly we got a long way to go. But again, everything we're going to talk about here is how it exists right now, not necessarily how it will exist in the future. So let's go back into So if you've been to these dive meetings before, we've shown this off a few times, but I think that this is really interesting too, where this is a tool made by Meta within their Horizon worlds, which is like their metaverse, if you will. And it basically allows you to build the world around you using just your voice.
First, let's start with the scene. Let's go to a park. Actually, let's go to the beach. Pretty good. Let's add some clouds. Huh.
Yeah.
That's all AI generated. Actually, let's add some alto cumulus clouds. All right. And let's add an island over there.
I think that's so cool how it integrates with where you're looking and where you're pointing.
Trees out here by the sand.
And you can also see how
Let's
if you
get a picnic
implement this
blanket
with
down
the
here.
text to 3D that we had
put up
shown
a
earlier,
table.
this can look photorealistic
Let's put a
as opposed to
stereo.
being just
Let's
blocks.
get some drinks as well.
All right, I think you get the idea.
Let's get.
And this actually came out in January, it kind of came out that Apple was working on basically a very similar feature for that headset that we were talking about earlier, using Siri to basically create your own spaces as well. And then this is really interesting. So this is, somebody had integrated ChatGPT directly into the Unity editor and allows you to actually build games.
He did to demonstrate it in action, and this is kind of mind-blowing. So we're going to say, create 100 cubes at random points, and boom, it did so. All right, so that is our first command done. You'll notice they were all called cube over here, so now what we're going to do is move the cube, quoted for literal name, game objects, so that y equals absolute of y, and then we'll go ahead and run it. Now sometimes, again, you will get errors. You basically just run the command again, and it will work just fine. It is not anything more than
So, I mean, you can kind of fast forward in the video, and
There we go.
there's all sorts of things
And
where now
it's
he's
going to
adding
create a
lights and all this stuff. But I'm just going to point out, ChatGPT came out at the very end of last year. It came out in November 2022. The ChatGPT API, so the way that you're able to tie in ChatGPT to another software, like Unity or like anything else, came out less than a month ago. So like this is where we are like 3 weeks after this technology has basically been available. You can imagine 5-10 years from now how easy it's going to be to basically just type in the exact kind of game that you want and it'll just make it for you, right? So if we're building a game world of some kind, again, you can just generate that world in 5 seconds, and you can code in all of the interactions or every animations, anything that you would need kind of in that world. So hugely powerful here.
He did to demonstrate it in action.
So that was kind of the ways that AI is helping us build all of the assets for the metaverse, right? So all of these different game worlds, all of these different objects, even kind of the scenes as a whole within a Unity editor. So now we have all these huge spaces. We have basically infinite number of virtual worlds that we can exist in. Now we want to talk about who's going to be in those worlds, right? And we imagine it'll be us to some degree, but it'll also be kind of some other things that we'll talk about in just a second. So this is the first one, which is that AI is going to help us become something else within the metaverse. So we're going to have a virtual character. That virtual character is going to be us, and they're going to kind of exist in these virtual spaces, but there's a disconnect here. And what's really interesting is that you can kind of start to make this character whatever you want it to be. So, I mean, I found this clickbait kind of funny, but like these voice changers, they exist, right? You can hop into a VR world and change your voice to be whatever you want it to be. This is an example of Ready Player Me, if you guys are familiar, but basically you take a selfie and then it automatically generates a 3D avatar that looks just like you. So these are kind of the ways that you're going to become this virtual character. And then this is an amazing software called Move.ai, which basically uses just a camera feed to rig a 3D model that does the exact movement that you're doing. So in the past, you had to wear these complex motion capture suits. You had to be in an entire studio. We're at a point now where you basically just take a video of you doing whatever you want, and that can directly tie to whatever virtual character. So you don't need to, like, if you put on your VR headset and you just go into your room and do whatever, your character is going to basically be able to follow every action that you're doing in real time, which is pretty amazing. So this is interesting, but I think what's really fascinating about this is how this technology is going to affect the way that we view identity in the metaverse. And I think that we could do probably an entire presentation about just the way that the metaverse is going to affect the ways that we look at ourselves. This is a bit of a meme, and it ended up being kind of like an NFT scam thing, but I think it's kind of funny. But it's this idea of like, oh, you can become like a woman in the metaverse and no one really knows, right? Which is, again, it's a meme here, probably a little bit distasteful, but I think it's fascinating in terms of what it represents, which is the fact that when you go into this virtual space, you have no idea what somebody behind the headset actually is. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter at that point. And we're going to start seeing these lines just completely blur and completely essentially go away. This is an amazing, amazing video. It's about an hour long, but I'll link it in the Discord afterwards. But it's basically about how VR is affecting gender identity, specifically in VR chat right now, and how it's kind of affirming people's beliefs about themselves, and it's just allowing for an alternative way of expressing themselves that was basically never allowed. It was never available before. So it's pretty amazing kind of what's happening here. And then this is from Harvard Medical School. It's kind of the foundational concepts of gender identity and kind of everything from the sex assigned at birth all the way through gender perception, kind of how other people perceive you. And I think a lot of this stuff kind of ends up in this outer yellow, but I mean, it kind of starts to bleed down a little bit as well. So again, we could do an entire meetup about this, and I kind of hope that we do one day. But this is something that I think is really fascinating, which is that, okay, it's not just you going into this metaverse. You're creating an entirely new identity that doesn't abide by any of the rules that we have here. And it's not even that you can be kind of a different kind of human. You can be a different kind of being altogether. You could be a dinosaur if you want, right? And those, as these virtual beings, as our virtual selves become more and more important, as we start spending more and more time in these worlds, those virtual identities that we have for ourselves are going to become more and more relevant to the world as a whole. So I think that this is a very, very fascinating concept. So we just basically talked about how kind of you are going to exist in the metaverse. Now, this is something kind of completely different. This is AI assistants. So these are going to be characters that exist in the metaverse with you, but they're completely AI generated, right? So if you kind of look at where we are now, right, this is Google Assistant. So this is essentially Google's version of Siri. And you can ask Google Assistant to make phone calls for you. So you can say, hey, call this restaurant and see if they have an availability for 7. And your AI will call and be like, hello, I am an AI assistant. I am calling to see if you have a reservation at 7. And it'll know what they say, and it'll make a reservation automatically for you. These are plugins for ChatGPT. This just came out last week as well. But basically, you can integrate ChatGPT with all of these different services online. So you can say, hey, search New York City for vegan restaurants that have a meal that's under 700 calories and make a reservation for 7 p.m. And ChatGPT can integrate with all the different services that allow for that to happen and just do it, which is pretty freaking amazing. But this is all existing in our 2D world. This is existing on our phone screens and on our computers. If we kind of imagine what this is going to look like in a 3D world, again, this is some goofy fan art that I found on Pinterest, but it's this idea that, okay, our assistants, our AI assistants, are probably going to become personified in some way. They're going to exist as actual beings and actual entities in our space. And it's not hard to imagine how you can start to send your Siri bot to go to your work meeting in the metaverse, to go take notes for you, or to go run that errand that you don't want to worry about, right? You can start to see how this kind of idea becomes personified as an AI being that actually goes and does things for you in physical space. Maybe not real life space, but at least metaverse space, if you will. Do you have a question?
Have you heard of the game called Detroit Become Human? That's a great example of AI in terms of physical games.
Can you explain it? I don't really know. I
Basically-
know the game, but I don't know anything about it.
Basically, you can buy like an assistant, and it's like an AI driven. It has emotions kind of thing, but it's restricted to do stuff. You can tell, but you can go tell it to do all the stuff and whatnot. And it's just a big story. It does not directly follow AI stuff, but it's like that idea of you have personal assistants that are physically there, not just in the screen, that have like minds of their own. They're AI.
Right. To your point about having emotions and personality, you're going to be able to kind of code those things in, right? If you want your AI assistant to be sassy with you or hold you accountable, they can. If you want them to be really kind, they can as well. And there's a whole bunch of ethical implications here where it's like, do we limit the ways that you are allowed to talk to your virtual assistant? Do we have restrictions on the way that you can treat them? Does being abusive to your AI assistant have real world implications?
And that game does kind of go into that thought line.
Oh, interesting.
The consequences and stuff.
What is it called again?
Detroit Become Human.
Detroit Become.
Yeah. So I think that this is fascinating. But then, so this is kind of, these are AI beings that will kind of exist within space with us, but I think my guess is that we're probably going to be able to recognize that they're AI. But what if we can't? So this is the idea of an entire being that exists in this world that isn't tied to any specific person. They're not my assistant. They just exist here. So I thought, obviously this is kind of a goofy question, but it's like, right, can you identify which of these is not a real person, right? This is real life. Like, I imagine we can all identify who is the real person and who's not. But in the metaverse, how are we going to do that, right? That question becomes a lot more difficult. And to kind of the point about identity, right, where it's going to start to, it's not going to really matter what your real life identity is because just the system will make that kind of not important anymore. I think the same thing is going to apply to even existing at all. And you're going to have friends that are completely AI and you'll never even know about it, which is kind of scary to think about. And honestly, I don't really understand what kind of implications of this on a societal level are. I'm just kind of pointing out that I think that this is kind of where we're headed in some way. So if we're actually talking about kind of how these kind of AI NPCs are going to operate, how they're actually going to work, let's look at some of the tools that are kind of going to allow that. I'm sure you guys have seen these. Have you guys seen these like presidential gamer voice chat memes?
Yeah.
Oh my god, they're absolutely freaking hysterical. Again, they're probably a little distasteful, but...
Don't be a pussy, Obama. I bet it wasn't even Cali Kush.
The first time I smoked weed, I passed out for a week. I couldn't even speak properly.
You can't even speak properly when you're sober.
Guys, I just want to freestyle right now. Donald, can you play one of your beats?
I'll play one now. You better not start spitting some trash.
I can't wait to hear this.
Brandon, I'm so proud of you.
I'm running this shit like the president. Shorty so fine, could have sworn she was heaven sent. I'm mixing the lean with the Zans right now. Just look at my eyes and it's evident. We say that he's tough, but I wish he would try. If we catch him lacking, you know he don't die. We sending his body up into the sky. His mother be praying, asking God why. Trump made the beat, so you know it's a smash. My fingers be hurting from counting this cash. My foot on the pedal, I'm breaking the dash. If you need some heat, then you know who to ask.
Holy shit, Obama, that was crazy. Did you write that down?
Yeah, Obama, you were really spitting right there.
Thanks, guys. That was all off the dome. Dap me up, gang. This one is a banger. Donald, I just smoked a...
So, absolutely ridiculous, right? But like the text to voice here is actually freaking incredible. Like it actually sounds so good. And this is kind of another one. This is a AI Joe Rogan podcast where he interviews Steve Jobs.
You studied at Reed College. Tell me about your time there. What did you learn? And you dabbled in Eastern mysticism there, right? Do you still go back and look at Hinduism and Buddhist texts and things?
Not texts and things. I actually took a course in that. I have a very deep belief that the people in the Indian subcontinent are most responsible for human civilization's current state, whether it's math or spirituality or the art of storytelling. Western civilization is based on the art of storytelling. There's a great Indian epic that's 10 times.
So, I mean, this is an entire Joe Rogan Experience episode that he interviews Steve Jobs. But I think what's fascinating here is, one, it's the voice and how amazing and accurate those voices are. Like, they're spot on. And maybe there's a teeny bit of weirdness that you can maybe pick up on, but I think we're a few months away from that just not being a problem at all. But I think what's also fascinating is that the way that this podcast was made is that they fed Steve Jobs' entire history into an AI. So it's actually answering questions as Steve Jobs. So someone didn't write the script for this. They actually are asking Steve Jobs those questions, and then Steve Jobs' voice is replying to them. So this is kind of highlighting, one, the fact that the voices themselves are going to be accurate in this way, but also the personalities behind those voices are going to be coded in as well.
It's kind of close to having the idea of having like a downloaded consciousness.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, in some ways, like actually, I talked to some guy who was basically doing this for like elderly people, and the whole idea was basically preserving who you are so that you can talk to your great-grandkids or talk to your grandkids when they go to college, things like that. Someone's building an entire business around kind of this preserving your consciousness and kind of keeping it for later, and there's sort of a weird ethical dilemma there. I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it specifically, but I mean, it really is incredible, right? Just from a purely technological perspective, about one, how you can kind of generate these AI personas of somebody who exists, but also doesn't have to be a real person. Any story world, any fictional character can kind of be this way. You can go and hang out with SpongeBob and go bowling with SpongeBob, right? And it could act, that AI character could be just like SpongeBob, right? I mean, again, I think that this is pretty incredible, but this is kind of just the voice and the personality and the things that people are saying. But if we're actually going to see about how that, how that people will actually move, this is an incredible piece of technology, and there's a few similar ones. But this is text to animation. So this is basically saying, how do you actually take this 3D character and get them to move around a space in a realistic way? So this is a model that does text to animation. So you basically just write in plain text what you want this character to do, and it will automatically animate a 3D person model, a rig, that will do that. So you can start to see how quickly even just the technologies we're talking about in this presentation all come together, where it's like, okay, you have the ChatGPT stuff, which can like emulate a personality, and it can generate stories, and it can generate instructions, and then you mix that with a voice that can do text to speech, and you mix it with this that can operate in a world completely realistically. You can start to see how pretty quickly we're going to get to fully AI beings that are pretty much indistinguishable from a regular person using this service as well. So, okay, I think that this is pretty freaking mind-blowing and pretty awesome at the same time. And there's a few of these, so this is just kind of one, and this is from 2022, so this is a little while ago. And something else here, these models, a lot of them are limited by their data sets, right? They're trained off of data sets, and that's how they become good at doing this, right? If you take the idea of like the Move AI, where it takes the video of you and turns it into the 3D animation, right? Those are going to generate so much data that's then going to be used to train these, to actually make these better. So a lot of these systems are like self-fulfilling, where the more that you use them, the better that they get, and they can kind of amplify each other in a really interesting way too. So again, these are going to just get exponentially better and exponentially more complex. So I think that's pretty amazing. So that's kind of like, okay, who's going to be in these metaverses? What are these? Who is going to live in these worlds? And then I think that this is something we can't ignore here, which is that AI has a significant number of problems that are going to be amplified when we start to integrate them into everything that we do. So first of all, AI amplifies existing biases. So a lot of the AIs that we use, almost all of them are just trained off of internet data. And the internet is full of a lot of bullshit and a lot of things that are unfair about the world. And that just gets manifested in these AI models. These AI models aren't really smart. They're just reflecting the things that they have been taught. So this is an example. This is an AI generator. If you type in engineer, every single result is basically going to be a male or guy. Like, that's just how it's going to go. And like, that's obviously not true. That's obviously not fair. And that's obviously not a system that we want to integrate and start making decisions for us, right? And you can start to see how if now we have an AI being, an AI character that's going to be doing job interviews in the metaverse, and they have a skewed perception of what an engineer is, all of the same biases that affect real life are going to affect this world as well. And if we're not cognizant of that, and we're not building safety into the system that like is aware of this, we're just going to end up making an even worse problem for us in the future. So this is something we cannot ignore. And then this is an idea of kind of where does ChatGPT fall on the political spectrum? So, I mean, a lot of conservatives right now are losing their mind because they think that ChatGPT is like part of the woke monster that's going to like infect their kids with CRT or whatever. But like, there is something to be said about how integrating a political bias into an AI algorithm does have long-term effects. And you always have to think about it from what if the other side of a spectrum or somebody with like way worse intentions got a hold of a similar technology, right? And had this bias go in a different direction, right? Even if you agree politically with where ChatGPT lies now, you have to think about what happens if somebody builds the same similarized system on the other side of the spectrum and starts infecting this virtual space with virtual beings that all they do is talk about something that's on this side of the political spectrum, right? These are huge, huge problems. And you're starting to also see it right now with like TikTok. TikTok just testified in front of Congress because TikTok is controlled by the Chinese government. Theoretically, the Chinese government, right? It's right. But they're
whatever, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, no, it's not as simple as that, right? But I mean, the idea behind it is, do we want a foreign power to control an algorithm that affects what 150 million Americans see on social media every month, right? That if you just tweak the algorithm a little bit, you can start to sway public opinion in a huge way. And if we're not aware of those impacts, we could very easily either be kind of affected by a organization or a government or just an individual person who has bad intentions, or we just do it accidentally, right? Which is probably where a little bit more of this kind of comes from, right? I don't think anyone's sitting there at OpenAI deciding that engineers should be guys, but the system hasn't reinforced itself to where we've gotten to this point. So we need to be very, very aware of kind of the negative effects that come with building these systems and relying on these systems to create accurate information. And then this is a little piece that I stole from a different presentation that I had done about AR specifically, but I think it applies to VR as well, which is that every single thing that we do in the metaverse is going to be tracked. Like, think about how everything on your phone is tracked. When you go on Instagram, they know exactly what you're looking at. They know exactly how long you looked at it for. They know exactly where on your screen you touched. They know when you swiped up to go away from it. They know what apps you went to afterwards. They know every single thing about what happened to you on your phone while you were using their app. Now let's take that concept and apply it to a VR space where now there's no interface of a touch and a screen. Everything is integrated, and they know exactly where you are looking and for how long you looked at it and how much your eyes dilated to show you the interest that you had in it. They know exactly where you went, what you touched. They know every single thing about what you did in this virtual space. This is fucked up. And honestly, I'm a very optimistic person when it comes to technology. This is one of the few things that sends me into like an existential spiral and makes me question if this is all worth it. I'm not gonna lie. I think I'm gonna get a little bit preachy on you and just be like, this is so freaking scary. And I think we need to be acting now as far as, and again, this kind of goes back to the TikTok privacy thing where like Congress is drilling them, oh, how are you stealing user data? Yada, yada, yada. But it's like every social media app that you use is doing the exact same thing that TikTok is doing. The US government just doesn't like that China is getting that data, right, rather than the NSA. That's really the only problem here. But we really need to be kind of thinking about this like now, because every problem that we have with this on our phones is going to get exponentially worse when we start to put it into an immersive context. And even if we're going to kind of just look at this from an AR perspective, right? These AR glasses are going to know who you are, and if you have glasses, it's going to know who you are. And when it looks at you, we're going to be able to read everything about each other and everything that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And if we don't have privacy laws set in place, this is just going to become increasingly more invasive at everything that we do. Which leads us to advanced algorithm-based advertising. So this is kind of the progression of advertising as we know it, right? It started with this, right? Billboards, print newspapers. right? The way that they kind of decide to put this billboard that looks like this in this location is by demographics, right? They go, okay, this is kind of our target audience. They kind of live in this area. We're going to put this kind of billboard here, right? This is very rudimentary. This is very old school, but it's still using user data, right? They're still kind of trying to identify who lives where and how can we reach those people. But if you think about kind of where we are now, we've taken a pretty big jump, right? Now we can track everything that you do online, everything you do on your phone, and there's entire companies, some of the biggest companies in the world, make all of their money by basically tracking your data and then connecting that data to an advertiser that wants to sell you something. That's basically Google's entire business model, right? And you see it every time you get on YouTube. It knows who you are, and it will show you an ad that it thinks is perfectly for you. Now, we take this one step further, right? Talking about what we just said. If it's tracking every interaction that you have in a virtual world, in a metaverse context, right? It can now do the exact same thing. But now it's the billboards that exist in the real life. The billboards that you see are going to be customized to be who you are. The stores that you go to are going to have custom sales because of who you are. This idea of a targeted ad in front of a YouTube video is, again, going to become a part of everything that you do and every interaction that you have in the metaverse, if you will. And all of this is really, it's algorithm based. It's all AI based in kind of some abstract way. And just to kind of see what that looks like, and kind of, again, how we could start to see a convergence here of two existing technologies. This is straight out of Black Mirror, but this is something that I think is kind of scary but amazing in its own kind of dark way, which is, okay, we have these algorithmic-based advertising systems. Combine that with one of these AI image tools. Now, not only does it know exactly what kind of ad you need, and it can generate an ad specifically for you, but it can use your face and your friends in the ad itself. So imagine, okay, you're going down the street and you see a billboard for Schlitterbahn. Now it's just an image of Schlitterbahn, and the people that they chose to be models are roughly who they kind of are trying to appeal to on a demographics level, right? There's an advertising team that's trying to figure out who to put on that billboard to appeal to the most number of people that they think are going to go to Schlitterbahn. Now, it's going to be you and your friends on the billboard all having an amazing time at Schlitterbahn. And when Daniel walks by, he'll see himself and all of his friends at Schlitterbahn. And it'll be a different ride because they know that Daniel likes adrenaline rides and they know that I like to hang out and drink margaritas with my friends. Right? You can start to see how this gets really scary really quickly, right? So I think that's all I have. So I figured we can just open it up, talk about anything that we talked about today, and thank you for coming. Okay, so what part of that was the most insightful or most scary?
Something that we talked about in my computer, or what was it, contemporary issues in computer science class last semester was how, just like AI data sets are basically just like reinforcing training models. And so basically, if you're just any sort of output that you're getting is just like a product of the data set. And so at that point in time, how can we unbias the data set, especially when it's growing off of 40 years of, or more years of social injustices. And so it's okay, we devised a few different algorithms in class. But some of the things that people talked about was okay, do we clear our data set every 3 years and start from scratch? Do we completely enable ourselves to be audited by the federal government or any third party who wants to audit our system at any point in time? What are kind of things that still enable maybe the company to be kind of profitable, but then also be ethically sound? And all of those are theoretical discussions, and I don't think anybody's going to be I think there was one person in there who's already signed at Lockheed Martin, so maybe not them. But anybody else, am I going to accept a military defense contracting gig after taking this class? I don't know, but all things to consider.
Yeah, there's an example that I've heard a lot where it's someone basically trained an AI that can detect skin cancer. So it can look at it can take a picture of a mole and it can identify if it's skin cancer or not. And they had a huge data set and they trained it, and then they're like, wait, why doesn't this work? Like, it doesn't work. And then they put a ruler next to their freckle that isn't cancerous, and it goes, oh, that's cancer. And then they found out that the data set that they used to train the model had images of freckles that were just images of freckles, but all the images of skin cancer had a ruler next to them, because in a medical context, they take the photo with the ruler to track how big it is or whatever. So the AI learned ruler equals cancer, not cancer equals cancer. And they were like, oh my God, duh. Like, that's such a duh. But it's like, I mean, that just shows how these machines are actually pretty dumb at the end of the day. And it's really just what you tell them is all that they know. So
it's kind of like the analogy of trash in, trash out, you know?
100%.
Like, but if we really want to get rid of bias, not the easiest way, but probably the best way to do that would try to get, like, it'd take a while, but try to curve bias, like, before you use it in a data set. So don't, like, see your data set and try to pick out things that are already biased. But take, like, what's biased, try to fix that in real life first, maybe. Kind of make steps to, you know, curve it a little more. And that'll reduce the bias you probably get in your data set. But that would take a while to just curve a bias.
There's a paper that I read that I don't understand, and I want to question the people who wrote it. But apparently you can, like, introduce a level of noise to your data and get, like, less biased, like, more accurate data. And what noise would basically be is, like, you just add a bunch of random data points that are, like, not actually anything significant in and of themselves, but that, like, obfuscate the data enough that preserves privacy, so it can no longer be linked to, like, a specific person, even if, like let's say your medical data is being entered into a system and that medical data has, like, your name and your address and your blood type and all that other stuff in it. But if you add a certain level of, like, noise, you can, like, strip back, like, this is no longer personally identified to you, because that data point could be you. It could also be, like, a point that isn't actually anybody, but still follows the trend line. So therefore, like, it, you know, is plausible. There's enough plausible deniability that's not, like, an actual person.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of smart people working on solutions here, but we're clearly not there yet.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how this is a little different. I know people have made, like, they've taken movies and kind of used an AI to go over the individual frames and make them completely different. Kind of like, I saw an example of, they took the Jurassic Park opening and made it like an N64 Legend of Zelda, like, style.
Oh yeah.
But the way they actually kept it consistent most of the time is they locked the noise that the image would make. So whenever it deconstructed that image and made it noise, it wouldn't change the noise every time it went to a new frame. They'd just keep that noise similar. So by the time it got to the next frame, it make a similar image, and that's kind of how they went to make. It was still, like, really, like, staticky, but it was interesting.
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts? Well, I guess, does this idea of having a virtual world filled with virtual beings that you can't tell if they're real or not, does that freak you out? Or do you just not care?
It doesn't freak me out per se.
What?
I would be scared.
Burn it.
What?
No, I jokingly said burn it.
I don't know what that means.
Burn it.
Oh, burn it!
Burn the virtual people.
I'm just saying, like, I play a lot of, like, Counter-Strike, for example, right? And I'm really bad, but I just, like, random queue with random people, and I'm just, like, on voice chat with these random people. Realistically, if one of those people that I'm playing online games with is virtual, but they act just like any annoying person on, like, matchmaking, like, I don't know if that makes any difference to me.
I guess you thought the question is, if they're exactly like people, then what exactly is the problem? I mean, is it the fact that you're not talking to a person? Is that what's bothering you? Because otherwise, if they're indistinguishable, then what's your issue?
Right.
Slightly different topic. But,
That's okay.
I was thinking back to the part where you, like, the part about how perception of, like, gender and, like, some stuff might not matter anymore in the metaverse because you can just be whatever you want. But like, I feel like at the end of the day, that only applies if you're abandoning reality, because people still care about reality. That's the whole reason why currently people using voice changers or portraying themselves as like, what is it, like, a guy decides to use a girl's avatar, and then it becomes a whole backlash, is because they care, like, people currently care about the reality because of things like meeting up offline or like getting to know them personally beyond like a gang setting and whatnot. So like, I think that the idea that like identity might just completely change and doesn't really matter anymore, like if you're like what you are in real life, it only really applies if you decide, like, if like the whole sci-fi idea of like people migrate from reality to living in the metaverse. Because at the end of the day, like, I don't care, like, I play a lot with like a bunch of online friends, and 80% of people I play with comes from online, and I don't really care if any of them uses a voice changer, even though they joke about it all the time, and I don't really care who they are, but it just becomes kind of weird when they meet up and then somebody comes back and is like, oh, they weren't really who they seem like online, and it's like, oh, well, I don't know, but okay.
Yeah, well, I don't want to give the impression that all of a sudden, like, a real life identity doesn't matter anymore. I don't think that was really necessarily the idea. I think it's more of just as virtual spaces become more legitimized and we start to spend and put more value in virtual spaces, the identities that we attach to ourselves in that virtual context become more and more real, or more kind of important, or just kind of become more and more a part of how we see ourselves. But I don't think that a real life identity will ever kind of go away and this will replace it. That's not, I don't think that
No, I agree with that. I feel like thinking about it is like kind of weird, because if it doesn't matter, then it, like, ideally it wouldn't matter, because then we'd be focusing on the virtual identity as what it is, and maybe it'd be like together, like unified. But because people like inherently think of it as separate, like the metaverse me is the metaverse me, the virtual me is virtual me, and I still have me. So then that creates this gap where it's like people focus on that gap. And criticize it.
That's interesting. I would be interested to ask somebody who kind of does engage in kind of this idea, kind of how separate or connected they feel to that identity or that persona, right? How much of it they see it as just themselves, or how much of it they see it as like a separate self, or I don't really know. I'd be really curious to ask.
I feel like going off that point, also a lot of these type of like games and stuff that allow you to be whoever you want, they're made to be that way for that reason. So you don't have to, like, if you like don't want to see yourself as yourself in a game, they give you that freedom to be whoever you want. That's kind of part of the reason they allow that. So it's not necessarily like if someone, you know, masquerades, like if a guy masquerades as a girl in a game, that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, it's just because it's like he could just want to do that, you know. It's
right.
not like
I think that's
he has to be that way.
I really liked how when you kind of went onto the slide, I was like, yeah, that's kind of a great like way for someone to maybe explore their like identity. Like if I wanted to like present myself more femininely, then and I was kind of like really anxious about that and like how people would react, like my self-image, then I could do so and be like, oh no, it's not the end of the world, you know. And it could help me kind of get through that.
I feel like if we're engaging very often in a space, a liminal space where we don't attach a nuanced identity to figures, because, you know, we're not like looking at a 3D real life person, we're looking at like a portrayed image, something that is created from start to finish artificially. We may like, I think that it could have real life implications that, you know, for example, in today's world, it's like we're at a place where, you know, people try to end racism by acting like they don't see color. And if we engage in a space where nothing, like literally nothing about how you look actually holds value or nuance, I wonder how these ideas will translate from one place to the next.
When you say one place to the next, you mean virtually or?
Like kind of all of it. Like as like we move across like virtual realms and the physical realm, and then back and forth, and within each space, what changes because of the interactions we're having in a virtual system?
Do you feel like you have an idea of what that would be, or you're kind of just posing that as like it'd be interesting to see what that is?
Well, that's my question, but something I'm like leaning more towards is the idea that it could create a bigger issue of people like lacking nuance when communicating with folks face to face.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I could definitely see that being a problem. Oh, you're totally good. Yeah, you're totally good. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining.
I guess something I'm interested in this kind of on this kind of slide specifically is almost the new things that can even come beyond just like how do you present yourself as a human, but kind of do people start to embody these kind of alternative identities altogether, where it's like you're not even humanoid at all and you start to become something completely different. How as a society we accept that or even talk about that? Like, I just have no idea, and I think we're gonna see some interesting stuff there.
Especially in games, I find that there are like two types of people that you see. So one is the person who maintains a digital identity that's a reflection of who they are as a person. That there's a clear line, or the opposite. There is not a clear line between who they are virtually. They consider themselves an extension, or their character, or whatever, an extension of who they are. The other type of person you tend to see is a person who is diverging their real life from the virtual version of themselves. And in that case, I find that they don't often identify with that so much as using it as a form of virtual escapism. A way to feel and experience something that they otherwise couldn't. But they don't necessarily attach themselves personally to that. You know, in something like the Metaverse, where it's taking an even bigger chunk of our lives and giving more importance, who knows? But as of right now, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
You asked that question about what other forms we could take, and my mind immediately went to Pokemon, like Ditto. Like, it would just be like people walking around as Ditto and like VR.
They'll have the blinks.
Just the beady eyes. Just the beady eyes.
Well, I think this is a very like philosophical question, and I don't think that this has any actual answer. But it's like this idea of like virtual escapism, right? And kind of not seeing this other entity as an extension of themselves, but seeing it as kind of a separate place to go to. Like, philosophically, does that still end up just being an extension of themselves, just with like a level of kind of cognitive dissonance kind of added in? Or do we really start to accept and see that alternate entity as fundamentally separate on a philosophical level? Like, I don't think that there's an answer, but that's something that I'm kind of curious about and interested about. But I think as kind of this space becomes more and more real, and again, more and more legitimized as a place to actually spend your time, I think we're gonna have to start at least kind of accepting digital entities as legitimate and as real and as just a normal part of society.
We get to that Ready Player One kind of world eventually. I bet. Though I feel like if everyone tries to go down to the escapism route with like VR and stuff, I feel like that would have a lot more repercussion in terms of, so now we're all in VR, but how are we gonna worry about the stuff outside of VR if we're mostly in VR like all the time? I feel like that's why AR stuff would be better in that way, because then we're still seeing things outside. It's just, you got other things kind of just that you can only see.
I agree with you, and that's why I think I'm more of an AR person than a VR person, right? I'm more excited for the AR features than the VR for that exact reason.
And I feel like the VR is more of just like a means to like play games or like work on, like, see things and work on things that you probably couldn't do in real life. But AR is more for just the assistance for daily life and to help you get around.
Right.
I wouldn't say VR is that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's
but
more of almost like toy or not really a tool per se.
Yeah.
There is not yet a killer VR app.
Or killer AR app, yeah.
Yeah.
I have thoughts on that, but real quick, the whole identity thing. After I think the point you raised about the like two types of people, it also just I don't know made me think of D&D for whatever reason. Like currently, people who play D&D, well, they adapt the whole character, right? And then I've heard people talking about using AI generated images just because they don't want to draw out a bunch of characters for their campaign. But like in general, they become that person. And it's not really like Metaverse, but like it's also sort of an alternate not reality space where you're becoming another character. And like some people would choose to stay human. Some people will explore the fantasy realm.
Yeah, I think it's a great parallel.
It's just another side tangent.
It's a great parallel for sure.
And then I was thinking in regards to the AR VR thing. I forgot half of what I wanted to say, but I think it was sorry, could you repeat the main point that you were talking about?
I was saying that VR isn't so much of something that's going to help us day to day. That's going to be AR. VR is more of the fun side of the metaverse, and then AR is going to be the helpful side of it.
Or maybe you can make scams, for example, NFTs.
Yeah.
Virtual currencies. It's a good way for money laundering.
There are productivity things that are trying to build offices.
Alright. Sorry.
So
Sorry. No more Joe Rogan, please.
But there are I don't know. There's been companies that came to the what's it called, the SDCT thing. The thing that they come where come a speaker comes and talks about their company. City limits. Career city limits. There have been companies that come to Career City Limits and just talk about how we're engaging the metaverse, and then they talk about how I think AA Labs is one of them, where they talk about how they have this office. They're building out an office and how you can work with all these various UIs and whatnot in VR. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it's it doesn't seem like a toy thing, because it is kind of isolated from reality compared to AR. But I think there's two types of people, maybe more types of people who want to approach it differently.
I'll rephrase kind of what I said a little bit. I don't think that VR is specifically only meant for toys. So I know there's definitely productive things that you can have the monitors, so you can have 5 monitors on the computer, and that's helpful. But I was saying that AR is just going to be a little more practical than having a VR headset on all the time. I'd see AR just being there more often.
AR is also more accessible. VR headsets are more expensive. Just kind of the whole thing. AR is the easiest to adopt, and I think it's being utilized at a faster rate than VR is being built for right now. Because right now there's only one player, but AR, anyone can kind of build a Unity experience and push it to AR. Whereas VR, you kind of need a headset, and only one company has kind of that major share
But also think
right now.
This idea of AR versus VR is a kind of a conversation that we only have because the technology is very new and it's very immature. Realistically, if we're kind of looking at this mature, immersive tech future, this sci-fi level kind of future, there is no difference.
Yeah.
Or there's no distinction between an AR headset and a VR headset. It's you could have a headset that you wear that does do pass-through, and then you get on the bus, and then you go into the VR mode. I think the inevitable future is a seamless transition between the two, and the fact that we're having a discussion about an AR headset or a VR headset kind of just shows how far behind we are from...
It's so limited right now.
Sorry, what?
Tech is so limited right now.
Yeah. Well, 100%.
But will we still consider AR with handsets, or are we still required to
Like a phone?
Well, yeah, AR, even with the goggles, one thing that makes VR also unique beyond just 360 world view without the pass through is the hand, the controllers. AR, it's tapping. So in what realm? What would that look like if it's supposed to be both?
With the Oculus Quest 2, you can use your hands. You don't have to have a controller.
Yeah.
I feel with the AR stuff, it's also probably going to use your hands in terms of swiping and stuff. But I'd say it's just probably gonna pull that from the VR side because it's already implemented in some ways now. They don't use it a whole bunch, which is a shame. It's really cool, but it's kind of hard to like, cause you know, doing that with games, it's hard without having something to like restrict your fingers. It's hard to understand that you're gripping something or not with just having hand tracking, because you're not actually gripping anything.
Yeah.
They've made stuff to like have it so it restricts your fingers, so it feel like you're actually gripping something. But that's like still like way
Wearables
before
and
it's
stuff,
useful.
yeah.
Like we're finally getting into the whole omnidirectional treadmills in houses. That's becoming a thing. People are starting to have like, you know, you can invest in that, you know, produce it sometime later. But I guess until we really get those like things that'll make it feel more like we're touching something or like stuff like that, because you have haptics that make it like you can feel people touching you or something, or like getting shot or like in a game, you know, you can feel that. But I feel like the hands, we haven't really developed a lot for like actually touching something.
Yeah, I'm wondering what that would look like, because also it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I guess you'd have to wear gloves or something, like those kind of wearables.
Well, I've seen I saw like a product demo like a long time ago, where they had like a glove on and it had a bunch of strings. They were all tensiometers and stuff.
And
you know,
that's
they
what
grab it and it would pull back on your finger and restrict your fingers.
Yeah.
And it worked. It was really interesting how it worked. I mean, I would have safety concerns on that.
Yeah.
Like, what happens if you try to pull your hand
I know.
back? No, what like you'd
Just
have to
get a
have.
chip inserted.
You have to have like limitations, but it'd be interesting.
I'm personally of the belief that one, that tech is super cool, and I've been wanting to try haptic gloves for a while. But two, I don't think it's actually going to be that important. And I think we're just going to build systems that just don't require you to actually feel texture. Like, we're just going to have the ability to interact with things, and we're going to build a system that doesn't need that, and it's just going to be fine, and we're all going to forget about it.
I feel like we need texture.
Yeah, I feel like textures are
In order
like
to
it's
be
one of
like-
our senses. It's like quite important.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's kind of a next generation step, but it's like I think I could just very much see us building a VR system that just doesn't need that, and it's just as fine. Or you have controllers that kind of emulate haptics, right? In the way like a PlayStation controller has adaptive triggers, right? That
Well,
can
the
be.
way that the index controllers currently do.
Oh, they do too.
Well, I'm trying to get Aaron to. I put index controllers in the budget because you can use them with the Vive Pro.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
What I'd be interested to see is if they ever try to like create like dive technology in terms of like like you know, you're not actually moving, but it takes control of like kind of like you know how like SAO stuff
I don't want that.
I'd be interested to see if they actually ever try to do that.
Well, I think they are trying to do
Like
that.
a full dive.
I think they've been doing that on with like chimps and stuff for a long time, where they do control the robot arm across the room and that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, like physically, like almost diving into a virtual space without like you just put a headset on and somehow.
Yeah, but it's like if I can control a robot arm across the room, I can control an arm in VR, right? I would imagine.
Be interesting to see.
For sure, that's scary stuff, personally. Yeah, I'm not gonna let Elon Musk put a brain chip in me. I'm sorry.
Like, is that part of it? Like, especially in the sci-fi realm of stuff.
Yeah.
Technically, they didn't really have chips in them. There was more different reasons, but it'd be. I would like, especially like, I feel like with the Apple, you know how they're gonna release their thing, maybe. It's like, is this gonna be the year we get like the Apple Glass stuff? You know? Probably
Who
not.
knows?
It'd be interesting to see
It is
that.
heavily rumored to release this year.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll end it here. Feel free to stick around and chat, but thanks for coming. Yay!
Mm-hmm.